Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
We are going to start in the United States, so really starting to enable the acceptance and the larger acceptance of all credit and debit cards. The consumers will be global, right? Anybody all over the world that has access to an internet and wants to use their UnionPay card and be able to do commerce with a US-based merchant. That's what we're starting with in terms of enablement. So US-based businesses, but accepting cards all over the world via e-commerce.
That was Sandra Blair, our special guest on this episode 163 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. Sandra is an avid tennis player with a passion for alternative payments. She started her career as a programmer in the brokerage business, and now is the CEO of alternative payments platform Payverse. As many of you know, UnionPay is the largest card issuer in the world with more than 9 billion cards issued. And they went to Payverse exclusively with a request to develop a U.S. bank sponsorship model for UnionPay acceptance, and thus Payverse was born. The company launched in March of this year. Sandra and I go on to talk about her journey through payments and the future of our industry over the next couple of years and how Payverse views the world of crypto and BNPL. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Sandra. Thank you for being here and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that, and we'll dive deeper into your career in a few minutes.
Sure, sounds great. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I ended up going to Penn State to swim for Penn State, and then actually got hurt swimming and ended up graduating from Villanova, so close to home. I currently live in Santa Monica, California. I think like all of us during COVID, we made some changes and I decided I wanted to go live at the beach. And so I moved to California about a year ago.
Okay. So from one coast to the other.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's dive in and talk about Payverse. So tell the audience what Payverse does.
Payverse is an alternative payments platform. Really, we're starting to enable payment processing that traditional payment processors typically don't do. We'll be starting and launching with UnionPay acceptance. And a lot of people don't know that UnionPay is the largest card issuer in the world with 9 billion cards issued, kind of an overwhelming number. And then we will continue to progress through cryptocurrency processing, buy now, pay later, really focused on B2B electronification, I like to say, where B2B transactions tend to be check and paper today in the United States. So really wanting to augment the existing payment processing ecosystem in the United States, and then certainly have plans to grow internationally as well.
Okay. So when you mentioned UnionPay, so does that mean you're focused on a global audience or starting in the US and then growing?
No, it's a great question. We are going to start in the United States, so really starting to enable the acceptance and the larger acceptance of all credit and debit cards. The consumers will be global, right? Anybody all over the world that has access to an internet and wants to use their UnionPay card and be able to do commerce with a US-based merchant. That's what we're starting with in terms of enablement. So US-based businesses, but accepting cards all over the world via e-commerce.
And is your go-to-market strategy around having a direct sales team or partnerships or a combination of the two?
Really partnerships. I mean, obviously we're a small company and having a huge sales force going directly to merchants, I think is probably something that, and I know that we're not ready for. So it really wanting to partner with the existing processors, wholesale ISOs, ISVs, marketplaces in the United States today that have portfolios today and customers today that need UnionPay acceptance or want an easier way to accept cryptocurrencies or have a buy now, pay later solution, I mean, really what we want to do is make it easier so that individual businesses don't have to figure it all out themselves, don't have to become experts in buy now, pay later and all the different schemes there are there, or be able to understand cryptocurrency. I mean, all of those new emerging payments, we really want to be the expert and be able to offer to businesses, but through those channels, whether it's processors, ISVs, wholesale ISOs, be able to offer and add value to their existing offerings to the market.
Okay. So is there a consulting component to it, or is that just sort of part of the business model itself?
It's just really part of the business model. I think we've found we have incredible interest, but there is a lot of education around any of those, whether it's UnionPay, cryptocurrencies, really being able to help the global supply chain from a B2B perspective. A lot of folks don't know how it works today, what choices they have. Even some of the larger processors, when you talk about UnionPay, and we've had some amazing conversations with this great industry that we're in, really don't have a grasp on the market, the 9 billion cards, the fact that you're really unlocking this really untapped market of consumers, billions again of consumers. So I would say education is really the beginning part of our sales process, because until somebody understands it or understands what the opportunity is, they're not going to buy from us for sure.
So within e-commerce, are there certain verticals that are more of a focus?
Absolutely. There's a few really high ticket verticals that we're focused on, and certainly we partner with UnionPay to really understand the consumer behaviors. A big one is tuition and higher education. Parents of students that come to the United States want to be able to use their UnionPay card to pay tuition, to pay for other higher education costs. And they're really unable to do that today. So higher education for sure. Luxury goods, online luxury goods is a big vertical for us, as well as travel and entertainment. When people from around the world that are holding UnionPay cards, they're not just in China, want to be able to book an airline or book a vacation rental in the United States or book a hotel in the United States while they're at home prior to traveling to the United States, there's a lot of friction today in being able to use their UnionPay card, and typically they have to take another card out of their wallet, although the UnionPay card is their card of choice.
I would assume you mentioned there's friction today, and given some of those verticals you mentioned are a little, I would assume, on the high risk side. So is there a lot of compliance and kind of challenges or maybe education that you have to do in that space?
There's both. And UnionPay asked us as Payverse to create the first compliant US bank sponsorship model for UnionPay acceptance. Prior to now, there didn't need to be a bank sponsor in the United States to process UnionPay cards. And I think that created, again, just some questions, because if you're going to process Visa or MasterCard or any of the other cards, right, you need a US bank sponsor. And UnionPay came directly to Payverse and asked us to put together a bank sponsorship model in the United States. And then they've asked their current members to move to a US bank sponsorship model. So we're very focused on the compliance and risk aspect and really treating it just as you would any other bank sponsorship, like with Visa and MasterCard. And we have a head of compliance. I have some industry experts in making sure that we are doing everything that we need to do to make sure that that's all the processes and procedures that we need are in place, and we have the right staff and the right people. But in addition to that, one of the differentiators that we have is that we're connected to all of UnionPay's platforms in Shanghai, and one of which has dual factor authentication, where if you're going to use your UnionPay card, you then get a text message on your phone, and that text message needs to be put into the checkout process. So really reducing certainly some fraud and risk in those areas.
Okay. And you mentioned what differentiates you. So what else would you say differentiates your company from your competitors?
The enablement of all the cards for sure is one of them. Also, and having the US bank sponsorship model, as well as with the technology. And so over the last few years, we've built a modern payment processing platform, which for those of us who have been in the industry for many decades, we've all dealt with a lot of legacy technology that really makes it hard to be able to move quickly, to be able to plug in other technologies. But our platform was built in the cloud, completely API enabled from the beginning, and really goes from sourcing leads through boarding, risk and underwriting, transaction processing, all the way through chargeback statements, tax reporting. So very excited about the platform that we have and being able to, again, with our partners in the industry, offer them not only new processing capabilities through alternative payments, but also a platform that's been built in the modern era that makes it easy for them to plug their existing technologies into ours.
And is the sort of go-to-market model around pricing is a traditional kind of transaction fee based, or are there any other SaaS models or anything else that you're doing?
Sure. A great question. On the transaction processing, it's, I would say, similar to what we're used to, although we've really tried to simplify it. So it's a percentage based on a transaction, as most international transactions are, and with a transaction fee, but it's really a flat fee. We don't have a lot of tiers in our process. And then on the platform side, there are many folks that have come to us who really just want to license the platform. And the platform itself has a monthly fee, licensing fee for the platform. So we're really trying to make pricing simple. You know, in our industry, it's gotten amazingly complex over the years. It's hard for anybody to understand it. So we want it to be easy to understand to anybody in the ecosystem, whether it's a direct merchant or an ISV or ISO, all the way up to the processors, just making it as simple as we can make it.
And is this solution live today?
It is. We have 2 clients today that are live on the platform, are actively in the market selling. We have maybe 15 proposals out. We officially only launched on March 1st. So we're excited. I mean, I think it's been inbound more than it's been outbound, which is a great sign for us. And so, yeah, we're ready to go. We have the platform, we have all the connectivity, we have the bank sponsorship. So we're just moving and growing right now.
Where do you see the payments industry heading in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
I think, well, we all hear about faster payments, right? And I think the consumerization of the expectations of payments being faster, I think is only going to accelerate. And I think we all need to be focused on what does that mean and how fast can we move. But as you talked about before, right, there's a risk component to moving faster. So I think those 2 things coming together is the demand for faster payments, but then new technologies, whether it's AI or other technologies like that, to ensure that payments are moving faster, but we also have the technology in place to make sure that they're the right transactions and they're going to the right people. And obviously, like any new emerging technologies, right, the fraudsters can be pretty savvy. And so really being able to protect that. But I think in the 2 to 3 years, and I think there'll be other emerging alternative payment. As we look across the globe, there's amazing innovation going on and at a faster rate than ever. And so I think there's going to be new ways to pay, new methods. And as we all know, no methods go away. We all that were in the industry 20 years ago, right? Check was going to go away, right? So everybody talked about there aren't going to be checks anymore. Well, there's still checks. And we continue to add payment modalities. So I think it's just going to continue to add, and innovation will continue to add to in some ways, the complexity, but it's kind of cool to give choice, right? To give choice to businesses on how to pay, how to accept payments, choice for consumers. I think it'll just expand.
Yeah. And you've already mentioned one of the buzzwords, so I definitely want to talk a little bit about cryptocurrency and what you guys are doing and where you think that's headed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I think in cryptocurrency that we're focused on is, again, and just in general, we're trying to make it easier for businesses and other people in our ecosystem to understand and not have to become experts in some of those things. So with cryptocurrencies, I don't know how many there are right now. I don't know, probably 150 different cryptocurrencies, right? I don't know any business that wants to understand 150 cryptocurrencies. So we're really focused on what are those primary players that we want to partner with and be the processor and take the businesses and the processors out of making any decisions. So our short-term product roadmap in terms of cryptocurrencies would be that we would be the processor enabling businesses to accept cryptocurrency but get paid in USD. So they don't have to worry about the exchanges, worrying about the rates, worrying about the volatility, that we would really stand in between and give them, and again, not have them display 150 currencies on their checkout page, right? What are those key three or four? And obviously we'll have to move and pivot with the cryptocurrency world, but certainly don't think it's going away. And I think there's a lot of adoption, not only in the United States, it'll become something that people will expect. There'll be an expectation that I can pay for. I've actually had conversations with car dealerships, which is amazing to me, where they want to be able to accept cryptocurrencies so people can buy cars. So we really want to shield, whether it's a merchant or a processor, from having to do the complex research that we're in the middle of doing and make those decisions. And really, from a display perspective, give them something simple and we can deal with all the complexity on the background.
Sure. And then you mentioned BNPL, another hot topic. So do you mind kind of describing what you guys are doing there and where you think that's headed in the future?
And that was something that was adopted outside of the United States much faster than it was here, right? South America certainly has been doing it for a long time, even for people buy their jeans and use buy now, pay later. But I think some of the models, and I'm not going to name names, I think some of the models are not really fair to merchants, right? Where merchants feel like they need to have a buy now, pay later solution, but where some of these entities are taking a pretty big percentage of the revenue from the merchants. And so there's some new emerging buy now, pay later models that really take the merchant out of the cost structure of buy now, pay later, and whether it's on the issuing side or other players in the market. And I don't want to share too much, but I really think that there's going to be some emerging buy now, pay later that the merchant, again, is kind of protected by the changes and the different models, and the merchant just gets paid, right? And they get paid in full. And the onus of the installments, any kind of interest being paid or any kind of transaction fee is outside of the merchant's purview. And all they worry about is making sure that they have the ability for somebody to click on a buy now, pay later option at checkout. And they have choice around the models that they're accepting and not feeling like they're forced into something that may not be so great for their business.
Makes a lot of sense. There's any kind of, I think what I've learned over the last 16 years being in the space is any kind of alternative payment, if you want to call it that, to where there's consumer demand and there's a need for it, the industry will figure out the best model. May not get it right the first time, but eventually the model will be figured out, right? And you'll end up with the typical 3, 4, 5 big players, and then you'll have all the regional components. So it's here to stay. And even with the scrutiny that it's getting in the regulatory areas, I think the consumer demand is too high for it to ever disappear.
We've certainly had our share of regulation in our industry, but it's a pendulum, and sometimes regulation has to come in to kind of make some corrections, then it swings back. And so I think we all need to think of that as a good thing. I mean, we're all in the business, but we're also all consumers and want to be protected.
Absolutely. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. So maybe talk about your career in payments and your journey and up to where you're currently now as the CEO there at Payverse.
So I started, as we said, I grew up in Philadelphia and started my career as a programmer in the brokerage business a long time ago. And I graduated with a computer science degree. And so then moved on from there to kind of a cool joint venture between Citi and State Street Bank, where we did benefits outsourcing for the Fortune 100. So massive companies, Sears, Rockwell, FedEx, companies like that. And it was kind of the advent of workflow, which is hard to believe. And so built some pretty amazingly complex systems to do benefits outsourcing there. And then from there, the CEO of that company asked me to go to Vital Processing. So for those who are listening that have been in the industry for a long time, Vital is now TSYS Merchant Acquiring. or I should say, I guess, global merchant acquiring. But it's hard to keep up with all the changes. Product development and delivery at Vital. And that was really kind of the first purely payments company that I worked for. And so grateful for that and have never left payments since then. I moved on from there and ran the payments practice for Alvarez and Marsal when I was moved to Atlanta and did some amazing things at A&M. It's kind of an incredible global consulting firm that does some pretty major things, was in most of the major banks in the United States, spent some time at the Pentagon and at most of the payment processors. And then from A&M, I became the CIO at Banco Payments in Atlanta, and then took on operations as well as being the CIO there. Was recently the chief product officer at Merchant E, actually in Atlanta as well, via Alvarez and Marsal. I wasn't a full-time employee, but I was a Alvarez and Marsal employee sitting on the executive team at Merchant E. And that's really where I met the Pay Scout team. That's where I met Cleveland and Manpreet. And Payverse is really a spinoff of their technology and initiatives to connect directly with UnionPay and build this modern platform. So thrilled to have met them. And we decided a while back to spin Payverse off as a completely independent organization, really a whole different business model than Pay Scout. That's how it happened, and that's how I got here.
Yeah, and Cleveland's actually been on the show before. Thanks for going through that and appreciate you walking through your journey there. What are some things that you're passionate about? So maybe one work-related passion and one personal passion.
On the work side, I have lots of them, but if I had to pick one, I would say it's diversity and inclusion. I have been passionate about it my career before it kind of became a big thing. I've talked a lot about it in our industry for a long time. I know we're getting better, but the room is not very diverse in most payment conferences or payments meetings that we have. And I know that the industry itself is focused on it, but it's something that I speak on a lot. I really think is important. I mean, as early as the recruiting phase, and you really need to have a plan in place, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but you really need to measure yourselves and plan for it and make sure that you're supporting others and working with other companies to make sure that we're all doing the right thing. I think if from a work perspective, it's diversity and inclusion. From a personal perspective, it's sports, right? I'm an avid tennis player, golfer, will go to any live sporting event, watch anyone on TV. So my outlet, and always has been, sports and athletics.
So do you lean towards teams on the East Coast or on the West Coast?
Well, while I was in Atlanta, I played in every league I think there was here. I'm an active tennis player in California. I have been a little disappointed. There's good tennis in California, but there's nothing like tennis in Atlanta. And I miss it a lot. Kudos to Atlanta. I was spoiled, I think, for all the years that I was here.
So did you become a Falcons and a Braves fan?
Well, a little bit. I like to go to their games. I think I've traversed the country, so I've lived in so many different cities. I'm a fan of the sports themselves, but probably not for any specific city.
And interesting you mentioned diversity and inclusion because we do actually a diversity and inclusion month as part of our show. So definitely when that comes around early next year, would love to have you on again and talk about that. I love to have people on the show who have a passion for it and have experience and can provide best practices and insights. And you're right, our industry has come a ways, but has a long way to go. Would love to have you back on the show in a few months if you're willing to.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I mean, any opportunity I get to talk about it, I would love to.
Awesome. Last question. So I always like to get different people's perspective. You've been in the industry a while, a little bit longer than me, it sounds like. But when I got in the industry, say 16 years ago, I kind of fell into it. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to build this career in payments. But kids in college today are coming out of school and they look at fintech and payments and kind of a hot industry to be in. And I'm sure they say, hey, I want to go in this industry and build a career around this. What would you tell them they should do to be successful in a career in payments or fintech?
I think the biggest thing is being curious and wanting to learn. I mean, I think, and I'm sure, Greg, you found the same thing. Our industry is incredibly complex. And so being able to get enough experience or ask enough questions to really be able to, whether we talked about ISVs or ISOs, and there's PayFac models, and their banks are very involved in all this, right? And there's a huge risk and compliance component to it. And there's regulatory, and we have people in our industry who are lobbying in Washington, D.C. all the time. And there's the issuing side of the business, and there's the acquiring side of the business. And then there's fintechs on the outer parts, right, that are connected into the ecosystem. So it makes it so amazing, right? For all of us who have been in it a long time, it changes all the time, and there's more things to learn, and there's more players. And so my biggest advice would be, don't think that you go to whether it's a payment processor, a fintech, whatever, that you're seeing the whole picture, and just make sure that you're really being eyes wide open and looking for who are the other players. How do I learn about more of the business? Because it's fascinating. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And so I would encourage any of them to go into a fintech, but just to continue to kind of understand the entire, I don't know whether anybody can understand the entire one, right? And as we expand globally, which I think we're going to expand globally pretty quickly, all of us are going to have a global presence, even more to learn.
Yeah, I think curiosity is a great trait to, like you said, go into it with your eyes wide open. Do you have a perspective on going to, like, you've been obviously in larger companies and now you're doing kind of the startup thing. Do you have a perspective on what's better or a recommendation?
I don't think either one's better, but I think I would encourage somebody to have both experiences. You just have a different viewpoint, right? And so if you have both, let's say in the first 10 years of your career, if you have the opportunity to be at a smaller fintech, innovating around, but then also have the opportunity to be, whether it be at one of the big car brands, one of the big processors, I think having at least those two perspectives really adds value to what you can give to other companies and really what you can do in your career.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, we've covered a lot of ground about Payverse and what you're doing there and the industry and where it's headed, and then a little about you. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. This has been great. I really appreciated the time.
Absolutely. What would be the best way for people to learn more about the company?
Sure. We have a website, payverse.com, and then anybody's welcome. I would certainly welcome any contacts, and it's just Sandra@payverse.com.
Well, Sandra, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know your time is very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Greg.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.